The hum of the airplane still echoed in my ears when I stepped off that red-eye flight, clutching my coat against the chill. I was exhausted from 12 hours of travel, but my heart was beating with a kind of nervous excitement that only love, or what I thought was love, could summon. I was 38, a wife of 15 years, and I had convinced myself that this trip was the grand gesture that would remind us who we were before life got so complicated. Ethan had told me he needed space. Work had been stressful, he said, and his mind felt cluttered. He wanted a cabin retreat in the mountains, away from the noise of the city. I had smiled, nodding as if I understood, but inside a dull ache had gnawed at me. Distance had already been creeping into our marriage, like ivy climbing silently, until you look up and realize your house is covered. I thought if I can surprise him, if I can show up with his favorite wine and that silly board game we used to play, maybe we could find our way back. The drive up the mountain was longer than I remembered, winding roads cutting through forests that seemed to stretch endlessly. Snow clung to the edges of the pines, and every mile seemed to carry me further from the version of myself who still believed everything was fine. I practiced the smile I would wear when I knocked on the cabin door. I imagined his startled laugh, the way he'd pull me into his arms, the warmth of the fire crackling as we cooked dinner together. For a moment, I almost believed it. When I reached the cabin, night was already falling. The windows glowed faintly yellow against the dark trees. My heart quickened. I parked the car quietly, grabbed my bag, and crept toward the door. But just before I raised my hand to knock, I froze. Voices. Not just one, two, and not muffled the way a television sounds, but real urgent voices. I pressed myself against the wall, the wood cold against my back, and strained to listen. "She has no idea," Ethan's voice said, sharp with a confidence I hadn't heard in years. A woman laughed softly. "Not me." Her tone was low, intimate, familiar. My blood turned to ice. "She'll never see it coming," Ethan continued. "Once the account is emptied and the papers are signed, she's out. We'll be free. Free." The words slammed into me like a fist. My lungs tightened. I wanted to storm inside to demand answers, but my legs wouldn't move. I stood frozen in the shadows, the cold biting into my skin, listening as my husband, the man I had flown across the world to surprise, plotted my erasure. The woman spoke again. "Are you sure she won't fight back? She seems smarter than you give her credit for." Ethan chuckled, arrogant, dismissive. "Sophia's loyal to a fault. She still believes I just needed space. She won't make a move until it's too late." Sophia, my name on his lips, sounded like a stranger's. I stumbled backward, my boot crunching against snow. Panic surged. I thought they'd hear me, but the laughter inside covered the sound. My heart pounded so loud it drowned out the night. I turned and ran toward the car, fumbling with the keys, tears stinging my eyes. My hands shook so violently I could barely start the engine. Driving down that mountain road, headlights cutting through the dark, I felt as though the life I thought I had been living was crumbling behind me. 15 years of marriage, vacations, birthdays, whispered promises in the dark. Was it all a lie? Or had love once been real before greed poisoned it? By the time I reached the small town below, my tears had dried into something colder, resolve. I pulled into a dimly lit diner, the kind that smelled of bacon grease and burnt coffee, and slid into a booth in the corner. My reflection in the window startled me. I looked older than I had that morning, as if betrayal itself had aged me in hours. I ordered tea, though my throat was too tight to drink it, and pulled out my phone. Messages from Ethan blinked across the screen, short, casual, full of the lies I now recognized. "Missing you tonight. Can't wait to see you when I'm back." My stomach churned. How many of those words had he texted her too? The woman's voice haunted me. Who was she? How long had she been with him? And how had I been so blind? I thought of the nights he came home late, the excuses about meetings, the sudden obsession with his gym routine. I had chalked it up to midlife changes, stress, the things we all go through. But now I saw the pattern clearly. I stayed in that diner until the waitress began stacking chairs on tables. And then I drove aimless until the first gray light of dawn touched the sky. I didn't go home. Not yet. I couldn't walk into our house carrying only shock and despair. I needed a plan. At a small motel off the highway, I spread out my thoughts like puzzle pieces on the thin blanket. Ethan wasn't just cheating, he was plotting. He wanted to empty accounts, sign papers, leave me with nothing. He had underestimated me just as he told her he would. And that was his first mistake. Over the next days, I became a woman he didn't know. I pulled bank statements, logged into accounts he thought I never checked, contacted lawyers he didn't know I had connections to. Each discovery tightened the knot of betrayal, but also sharpened my focus. There were withdrawals, large ones funneled into a private account. There were legal drafts unsigned but ready with my name written like a formality in a plan I hadn't been invited to. And then there were the photos. A friend who owed me a favor slipped me a manila envelope. Inside were snapshots, Ethan and her, the mystery woman, laughing at restaurants, holding hands outside hotels, their faces brazen, unashamed. She was younger, yes, but not beautiful, in a way that explained his recklessness. No, this wasn't about beauty. This was about greed, about someone willing to build an empire on the ashes of my trust. Every night I lay awake in that motel bed, the hum of the heater filling the silence, imagining the confrontation. But I knew storming into the cabin that night would have given him the power. He would have spun lies, painted me as hysterical, turned the tables. No, I would not give him that satisfaction. Instead, I would wait. I would gather. I would build my own case the way he thought only he was capable of. And when the moment came, I would strike in a way he never expected. The hardest part was facing my own reflection. How had I become the woman who didn't see the cracks in her own marriage? Had I been so desperate to hold on to love that I ignored the signs of its death? I wrote in my journal every night, words spilling out like wounds. I was loyal. I was blind. I was enough. He was not. By the end of the week, I had spoken with an attorney who looked at me with both pity and admiration. "You're lucky you came when you did," she said. "If he had filed first, this would have been much harder. But now you have leverage." Leverage. The word tasted strange on my tongue. I had always thought marriage was about trust, not strategy. But when trust is shattered, strategy becomes survival. I signed papers of my own that day, papers that protected me, that froze accounts, that made it clear Ethan would not walk away with the life I had built beside him. And still late at night, I found myself replaying the sound of his voice in that cabin. "She has no idea. He was wrong." I had an idea now, and it would be the last mistake he ever made about me. The morning I returned home felt like stepping onto a stage where every prop was poisoned. The scent of lavender cleaner still lingered, the shoes by the door. Neatly arranged, the framed photos smiling back from the hallway as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Every surface felt false now, every memory tainted. I carried my suitcase upstairs in silence, half expecting Ethan to walk in and ask how my week had been. The thought made my stomach twist. He wasn't there. He was still at the cabin. I had time. Time to search to see what he had left in plain sight, because he thought I would never look. I opened his desk drawers, his filing cabinet, even his laptop. Passwords fell easily. I knew him better than he realized. Bank accounts showed transfers just as I had suspected. Hidden folders revealed scanned drafts of divorce papers unsigned, waiting like a trap he thought I would step into blindly. I found a notebook tucked beneath a stack of sports magazines. His handwriting filled the pages, numbers, dates, coded notes that at first made no sense. But the pattern revealed itself: meetings with her, purchases made for her children, reservations under fake names. He had documented his betrayal with the precision of a man balancing ledgers. Each entry was another crack in the foundation of our life together. I sank into his chair, the weight of 15 years pressing down on me. I thought of the young woman I had been when we married, hopeful, trusting, eager to build a family. I thought of the nights I had stayed up with our daughter when she was sick, of the meals I had cooked after long days at work, of the loyalty I had given without question. And here was Ethan, tallying the cost of replacing me as if I were a piece of property to be liquidated. But grief slowly hardened into resolve. I wasn't just gathering evidence anymore. I was preparing for war. I contacted the attorney again, sliding the notebook across her desk. Her eyebrows lifted as she flipped through the pages. "He made this easy for us," she murmured. "It's not just financial misconduct anymore. This shows intent." This shows planning. Her words steadied me. For once, I wasn't just a betrayed wife, I was a strategist holding cards he didn't know existed. That night, I lay in our bed alone, staring at the ceiling. The silence was deafening, but in it, I heard echoes of his voice from the cabin. She'll never see it coming. He had underestimated me for the last time. When Ethan finally returned, I was ready. I heard his key in the lock, the familiar shuffle of his shoes, the sigh he always gave when he dropped his bag by the door. I stood in the kitchen, arms folded, watching as he walked in, his face lit with surprise. "Sophia, you're home early." The ease in his voice, the casual smile nearly broke me. How could he look at me so calmly, knowing what he had planned? But I forced my own smile, masking the storm inside. "I missed you," I said softly, and he leaned in to kiss me. His lips were warm, familiar, but I felt nothing. It was like kissing a mask. Over the next days, I played my part. I cooked dinner, laughed at his jokes, asked about his retreat. He lied smoothly the way only a man who has rehearsed deceit could. And I let him because every lie was another rope I would use to bind him later. But behind the curtain, I was building my case. Quietly, carefully, I moved funds into accounts he couldn't touch. I met with investigators who traced his hidden assets. I confided in no one, not even my closest friends, because betrayal had taught me that silence was my strongest ally. And still, there were nights I broke. Alone in the bathroom, water running to drown the sound. I sobbed into my hands, grieving the man I thought I had married. I hated him. I loved him. I wanted him to hurt, and I wanted him to beg for forgiveness. The contradictions tore at me, but through it all, one truth remained: I would not let him destroy me. The breaking point came 2 weeks later. I was folding laundry when his phone buzzed on the counter. The name on the screen made my heart lurch. Isabel. I hesitated, then picked it up, answering before I could talk myself out of it. "Ethan," a woman's voice said, low and sharp. "This is his wife," I replied, my voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. Silence. Then a laugh, cold, mocking. "So you finally know?" "I know everything," I said. "Good," she sneered. "Then you know he's mine now. He promised me the house, the money, the future. You were just the warm-up act." Her words sliced through me, but I forced myself not to flinch. "We'll see about that," I whispered, and hung up. When Ethan came home that night, I didn't confront him. Instead, I cooked his favorite meal, set the table as though nothing had happened, and watched as he devoured every bite, oblivious. He thought he was still in control. He thought I was still blind. And that was his second mistake. Because in my purse, tucked between receipts and lip balm, was the file my attorney had prepared, documents that would not only protect me but strip him of the power he thought he had. I remember standing at the sink after dinner, rinsing plates, staring at the reflection of his silhouette in the window. I thought of all the years I had poured into him, the pieces of myself I had given freely, the loyalty he had turned into a weapon against me. My chest ached with a grief so deep it felt like drowning. But underneath, a fire burned steady. He went to bed early, claiming exhaustion. I stood in the hallway for a long time, listening to the rhythm of his breath, steady and untroubled. How easily he slept, even as he planned my destruction. How easily he dreamed, never imagining that I was awake, wide-eyed, and already plotting his undoing. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table, papers spread before me, the glow of the lamp casting long shadows. My pen hovered over signatures that would change everything. I thought of my daughter, her laughter, her innocence, her future. She deserved a mother who didn't cower, who didn't stay silent in the face of betrayal. By dawn, the signatures were complete. The first step was taken. When Ethan woke, he found me in the kitchen with a cup of coffee. He kissed my cheek casually, thanked me for breakfast, and walked out the door, briefcase in hand. He didn't notice the faint smile that tugged at my lips. Because now it was my turn to say it silently, to myself, to the walls, to the life we once shared. He has no idea. The first court date was set for early spring. I remember the sharp bite of the wind that morning as I walked toward the courthouse, documents tucked securely in my bag. My attorney walked beside me, her heels clicking with a rhythm of certainty I tried to borrow. My chest felt tight, my palms clammy, but my steps did not falter. Ethan was already there, standing on the steps with Isabel. She was exactly as I had imagined, younger, smug. her hand resting possessively on his arm like she had already claimed the life I had built. Her eyes met mine and flicked downward, assessing, dismissing like I was some relic of the past she had replaced. The kind of arrogance only ignorance could afford. Ethan smirked that same crooked grin he once wore when he was trying to charm me. "Sophia," he said smoothly, "this doesn't need to be ugly, we can do this quietly." Quietly, as if betrayal should be wrapped in silk and hidden away. I held his gaze steady. "No, Ethan, you don't get to script this." Inside the courtroom, reality looked different. My attorney laid out the timeline with surgical precision, bank transfers, coded notes from his own journal, the photos of him and Isabel. Every word, every piece of paper tightened the noose he had fashioned for himself. Ethan shifted in his seat, his confidence leaking out like air from a punctured tire. Isabel, seated behind him, fidgeted with her phone, her painted nails tapping restlessly. When the judge asked Ethan for his response, his voice cracked. "This is exaggerated. She's twisting everything. Sophia has always been dramatic." But the evidence spoke louder than his words. The judge's expression remained unmoved. Walking out of that courtroom, I didn't feel triumph, not yet. Betrayal doesn't untangle itself in a single hearing. It lingers, it festers. But I felt the first real taste of vindication, like inhaling clean air after drowning. Days later, Isabel cornered me in the parking lot of the grocery store. She slid out of her car with sunglasses perched high, her perfume clouding the air between us. "Do you think you've won?" she asked, her tone dripping with disdain. I kept my hand steady on the cart handle. "I don't think, I know." Her lips curved into a smirk. "He'll never love you the way he loves me. That's why he chose me." I almost laughed, then loud, bitter, unrestrained. "Chosen, Isabel. He didn't choose you. He used you. And one day when you're no longer useful, he'll do to you exactly what he tried to do to me." For a fleeting moment I saw fear flash in her eyes. But arrogance quickly covered it. She flipped her hair and walked away, her heels clacking like hollow applause. That night, as I sat at the kitchen table, I replayed the encounter. My anger was sharp, but beneath it was something else, pity. Isabel thought she was the victor, the woman who had won the man, and the promise of a future. But she didn't see the cracks, the desperation in his eyes, the way his empire was crumbling. She didn't see that she was clinging to a sinking ship. Meanwhile, Ethan tried to reach out. He called, he texted, his messages shifting wildly between rage and desperation. One moment he threatened to ruin me, the next, he begged for reconciliation. I ignored them all. Silence was my weapon now. Still alone in the quiet hours, doubt gnawed at me. Could I have done more? Could I have saved our marriage before it unraveled? I thought back to the early years, picnics in the park, whispered dreams beneath cheap blankets, the way his hand once fit perfectly in mine. Had that love ever been real? Or had I been blinded by my own hope? I remembered the night our daughter was born. Ethan had held her, tears shining in his eyes, whispering promises of forever. I had believed him then, believed every word, and now those memories cut deeper than any courtroom argument. Because the hardest betrayal isn't losing the man, it's realizing the man you loved never truly existed in the way you thought. One evening, my daughter found me sitting in the living room, staring at an old photo album. She climbed beside me, her small hands resting on my arm. "Mom," she asked softly, "are you okay?" I swallowed hard, forcing a smile. "I will be, sweetheart." Her eyes were wise beyond her years. "Daddy made a mistake, didn't he?" I kissed her forehead gently. "Yes, a very big one. But that doesn't mean we're broken. We're still us." Her smile, fragile but real, was enough to remind me why I was fighting. Not for revenge alone, but for survival, for dignity, for her future. Weeks blurred into hearings, filings, whispered gossip among friends and neighbors. The story spread as stories always do. Some offered sympathy, others offered judgment. I learned quickly that betrayal isn't just personal, it becomes public, dissected by those who thrive on scandal. But I held my head high. Let them talk. Their whispers couldn't undo the truth. Then came the night Ethan showed up at the house. He stood on the porch, rain dripping from his hair. His suit wrinkled, his eyes wild. I opened the door only enough to block his entrance. "Sophia," he pleaded, "please. I've lost everything. Isabel's gone." She says I'm worthless without the money, without the house. She used me. I need you. I stared at him, my heart cold. You plotted to erase me, Ethan. You wanted to strip me of everything. And now you're standing here asking me to save you. His face crumpled, his bravado shattered. I made a mistake. No, I corrected him. You made a choice, and now you're living with it. I closed the door, the sound of the lock clicking echoing like finality. I leaned against the wood, my breath shaking, tears threatening. Not because I wanted him back, but because it hurt to see the man I once loved reduced to a stranger I could no longer recognize. That night, as the rain beat against the windows, I sat with my daughter and told her the truth. Not every detail, not the darkest parts, but enough. Enough for her to understand that betrayal is not the end. That sometimes the people we love the most are the ones who hurt us deepest. And that strength isn't about never breaking, it's about how you rise after you fall. For the first time, I felt something close to peace. Ethan's empire was crumbling. Isabel had vanished from the picture, and I was still here standing, breathing, fighting. But I knew the final battle was still to come. The climax was waiting, the moment when Ethan would face the full weight of his actions, when karma would land its final blow. And I would be there to witness it, not as his wife, not as his victim, but as the woman who refused to be erased. The final hearing felt like the edge of a cliff. For months, the case had dragged on, each side presenting arguments, counter-arguments, documents, and testimony. I had lived through endless nights of anxiety, my stomach twisted with fear and anticipation. But as I walked into the courthouse that day, a strange calmness settled over me. It wasn't the calm of ignorance, it was the calm of knowing I had already survived the worst. Ethan arrived late, his tie askew, his once polished appearance unraveling. Isabel was nowhere to be seen. I heard whispers among the crowd she had left him, taken what little remained of his pride, and vanished. The irony wasn't lost on me. He had tried to build a future with her by erasing me, and in the end, she had erased him instead. Inside the courtroom was hushed, the air heavy with anticipation. My attorney presented the final round of evidence, bank records, testimony from investigators, the journal Ethan had so carelessly left behind. The judge's gaze was steady, unyielding, as though he had already drawn his conclusion. When it was Ethan's turn to speak, his voice trembled. Gone was the arrogance, the smug confidence he once carried like armor. In its place was desperation. He spoke of love, of mistakes, of misunderstandings. He tried to paint himself as the victim of temptation, a man who had simply lost his way. But truth is heavier than excuses. And the truth was written in every transfer, every hidden account, every whispered promise to Isabel that I had unearthed. The judge's ruling was decisive. Assets were divided in my favor. Custody was secured. Protections were put in place. Ethan was left with the wreckage of his choices. I should have felt triumphant. I should have felt victorious. And yet, as I sat there listening to the gavel strike, what I felt most was sorrow. Not for him, he had earned his downfall, but for the years lost, the love wasted, the version of myself who had believed so completely in a man who was willing to betray her so thoroughly. Ethan's eyes found mine across the courtroom, brimming with something that might have been regret. But regret is not redemption, and I did not look away. Afterward, as I walked out into the sunlight, reporters clustered, their microphones thrust forward, their voices overlapping. Sophia, do you feel vindicated? Do you have anything to say to your husband? I paused, the crowd pressing in. For a moment I considered silence, but then I lifted my chin, meeting their eager eyes. This isn't about revenge, I said softly. It's about survival. It's about remembering your worth when someone tries to take it from you. The words seemed to hang in the air long after I walked away. That night, the house felt different, lighter, as though the shadows had finally lifted. My daughter curled beside me on the couch, her head resting on my shoulder as we watched a movie. Her laughter rang out clear and unburdened, and I realized I hadn't heard it sound that free in months. But the story wasn't finished, not yet, because 2 days later Ethan showed up again. Not at the house this time, but at my office. My assistant's wide eyes warned me as she buzzed him in, but I waved her off. I wanted to face him one last time. He stood in the doorway, thinner, paler, his eyes ringed with sleeplessness. For the first time, he looked older than me, worn down by the weight of his own choices. Sophia, he whispered, please. I have nothing left. She's gone. The money's gone. I don't even know who I am anymore. I studied him, the man who had once been my everything, now reduced to this hollow figure. You wanted freedom, Ethan, I said quietly. Now you have it. He shook his head, tears welling. I made a mistake. I thought she loved me. I thought I could start over. My chest tightened, but I did not waver. You didn't just make a mistake. You plotted. You schemed. You tried to erase me. And now you're living with the consequences. He sank into the chair across from me, his hands trembling. I don't know how to fix this. I leaned forward, my voice steady. You don't. Because some things aren't fixable. Some bridges once burned cannot be rebuilt. For a long moment, silence stretched between us. Then slowly he stood, shoulders slumped. I'm sorry, he whispered. I didn't respond, because sorry wasn't enough. After he left, I sat in my office staring out the window at the city skyline. For the first time, I felt the full weight of closure. Not the kind you dream of with apologies and reconciliation, but the kind that comes from within when you finally accept that the past is gone and the future is yours to shape. That evening, I took my daughter out for ice cream. We walked through the park, the sunset painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. She skipped beside me carefree, her hand warm in mine. Mom, she said suddenly, are we going to be okay? I smiled, tears prickling my eyes. We already are. Because in that moment I realized something profound. My revenge hadn't been the courtroom victory or watching Ethan lose everything. My real revenge was this reclaiming my life, my dignity, my joy. Refusing to let his betrayal define me. And that was a power no one could take away. The story had reached its climax, the storm had raged, and now the quiet after was mine to keep. But even in that quiet, I knew one more chapter remained, a chapter not of battle, but of reflection. A chapter where I would look back on the wreckage, not with bitterness, but with the clarity of a woman who had walked through fire and emerged whole. The weeks after the final hearing felt almost surreal. For so long, my life had revolved around evidence, court dates, and preparing for the next blow. Suddenly, the storm had passed. The silence that remained was almost too loud, too strange. But slowly I learned to breathe again. I began with the small things. I painted the kitchen walls a pale yellow, replacing the sterile white Ethan had once insisted on. I cleared the closet of clothes that no longer felt like mine, donating them to charity, and filled the space with colors that made me feel alive. I planted flowers in the garden, each bud a symbol of rebirth. For the first time in years, the house felt like home, not a battlefield, not a cage, but a sanctuary. My daughter thrived in the new calm. Her laughter returned, her shoulders relaxed. One night she brought me a picture she had drawn, the two of us standing in front of our house, smiling, the sun shining overhead. Ethan was absent from the drawing. I didn't mention it, and neither did she. Some truths didn't need words. Friends I hadn't seen in months began to visit again, bringing bottles of wine, trays of food stories that carried late into the night. They had watched me stumble through betrayal, and now they watched me rise, their support like a net that had always been there waiting to catch me. Still, there were moments when the past tried to haunt me. I would be folding laundry and suddenly hear Ethan's voice in my head. She'll never see it coming. I would wake in the middle of the night, heart racing, as if I were still standing outside that cabin door, listening to the sound of my own erasure. But then, I would remind myself I did see it coming. I fought back. And I survived. One evening I drove back to the mountains, to the cabin where it all began. Snow still clung to the pines, the air crisp and sharp. The cabin stood silent, its windows dark. I stood there for a long time, staring at the place where my world had broken. And then I turned away. Because that cabin no longer had power over me. It was just wood and stone. The real battle had been inside me, and I had already won. Back in the city, Ethan's shadow lingered in rumors. I heard whispers that Isabel had left him for another man with deeper pockets, that he had moved into a small apartment on the edge of town, that he spent his nights in bars trying to drown regrets he could never escape. Once that might have satisfied me. Once I might have relished his downfall as the revenge I had sought. But now I understood something deeper. Revenge isn't always about destruction. Sometimes it's about reclamation. Taking back what was stolen, your peace, your dignity, your joy. Ethan had lost everything, but his loss wasn't my victory. My victory was standing here, whole unbroken, my daughter safe in my arms, my laughter returning to the walls of our home. One night, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the world turned gold, I sat on the porch with a glass of wine, watching the sky. My daughter sat beside me, her legs swinging off the edge, her smile soft and unburdened. For the first time, I felt something I hadn't in years: hope. I thought back to the woman who had boarded that flight 12 hours across the ocean, clutching a bottle of wine and a board game, believing love could be salvaged. I thought of the woman who had pressed herself against the cold cabin wall, listening to betrayal spill out like poison. I thought of the woman who had walked into courtrooms trembling but determined. And I thought of the woman I was now, stronger, wiser, unwilling to let anyone define her again. And I realized all those women were me. Broken, betrayed, resilient, reborn. My story wasn't just about Ethan's betrayal or Isabel's arrogance. It was about the strength I didn't know I had until I was forced to find it. If you're listening to my story now, if you've ever been betrayed, if you've ever felt discarded or erased, I want you to know this: you are not the sum of someone else's choices. You are not defined by the promises they broke. You are defined by the way you rise, by the way you rebuild, by the way you reclaim your worth. My story began with betrayal, but it didn't end there. It ended here with me, with my daughter, with a home filled with laughter again. It ended with dignity reclaimed, with hope reborn, with the quiet, powerful knowledge that I am enough. So if my words have touched you, if my scars have reminded you of your own strength, I ask you, share this story. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below. Tell me your story. Because when we speak our truths, we break the silence that keeps us trapped. And together we learn that betrayal does not end us, it begins us. Thank you for listening.